Admiral Kyung-Soo's fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Valtrine system. The capital world hung before them, a jewel of blue oceans and silver cities. Orbital stations ringed the planet like protective moons. Defense platforms bristled with weapons. Warships patrolled in defensive formations. It was the most heavily defended system in the Dominion. No enemy had ever attacked it. For 10,000 years, Valtrine Prime had been safe behind walls of military might and the fear its name inspired. Today, those walls would be tested. Kyung-Soo's fleet was not alone. Ships from 6 liberated species flew alongside human vessels. The Nethic had sent their newly captured warships. The Korthan, who had rebelled 3 months ago, contributed their powerful cruisers. Species that had suffered under Dominion rule now struck back as equals rather than slaves. The combined fleet numbered 800 ships. Against them, the Dominion could muster nearly 1,000 defenders. On paper, the odds favored the Valtrine, but paper did not account for human tactics or the burning desire for freedom that motivated their allies. General Hanna commanded Valtrine Prime's defenses. She had held this post for 20 years without firing a shot in anger. Her assignment had been a reward for distinguished service elsewhere. A safe posting where nothing ever happened. Now she faced the greatest crisis in Dominion history. She sent emergency messages to war leader Jae-sung, demanding his fleet return immediately. His response would take hours to arrive. She had to hold until reinforcements came. She ordered all defensive platforms to maximum readiness and positioned her warships to maximize their firepower. Kyung-Soo studied the defenses and made his plans. A direct assault would be costly. The Dominion expected traditional warfare, ships against ships slugging it out until one side broke. Humans would give them something different. Captain Wu Jin commanded humanity's stealth ships, small vessels with advanced cloaking systems. They could avoid most sensors. His mission was to infiltrate Valtrine Prime's orbital infrastructure and cause chaos from within. 20 stealth ships detached from the main fleet and began their approach. The Dominion sensors never saw them. Wu Jin's ship slipped between defense platforms and docked with civilian stations. Teams of special operations soldiers emerged wearing stolen Valtrine uniforms. They moved through the stations with confidence, carrying forged identification. Some teams planted explosives in critical locations. Others hacked into computer systems, stealing data and mapping the defense network. One team reached the central traffic control facility that coordinated all orbital movement. They seized control of it in a swift, silent assault. On the surface of Valtrine Prime, High Chancellor Jiwon received reports of the enemy fleet's arrival. She refused to believe it at first. Then anger replaced disbelief. How dare these primitives attack the Dominion capital? She ordered General Hanna to destroy them completely. Take no prisoners. Show no mercy. The battle began when Kyung-Soo gave the order to advance. His fleet moved forward in what appeared to be a standard attack formation. General Hanna smiled grimly. She had studied human tactics. She knew they avoided conventional approaches. This formation was probably a feint, she was right. The human ships suddenly scattered in multiple directions. The Nethic and Korthan vessels followed suit. The unified fleet became dozens of small squadrons, each acting independently. General Hanna's carefully planned defensive positions found themselves engaging targets from unexpected angles. Captain Wu Jin triggered his chaos. The explosives his teams had planted detonated simultaneously across 20 orbital stations, not enough to destroy them, but enough to cripple power systems and life support. Thousands of Valtrine civilians found themselves in emergency situations. Then his soldiers activated the traffic control systems they had captured. Warning signals blared across the defense network. False sensor readings appeared, showing enemy ships that did not exist. Real ships vanished from scanners. Targeting computers fed incorrect data to weapon systems. General Hanna watched her organized defense dissolve into confusion. Her ships were shooting at ghosts while real enemies attacked undetected. Her platforms could not coordinate their fire because their computers were giving them contradictory information. She had lost control of the battle before it truly began. Commander Jihai led a squadron of Terran carriers that launched thousands of small attack drones. Each drone was barely larger than a person and carried a single explosive warhead. Individually, they were insignificant. Together, they were a swarm that overwhelmed point defense systems. Dominion ships found themselves surrounded by clouds of tiny attackers. They shot down dozens, hundreds, but more kept coming. The drones crashed into hulls and detonated. Armor cracked. Systems failed. Ships designed to withstand massive energy weapons were torn apart by countless small explosions. The Korthan cruisers focused on the defense platforms. These species had built such platforms for the Dominion for decades. They knew every weakness, every vulnerable point. Their weapons fire was surgical, precise. Platform after platform went dark. For 17 days the battle raged. General Hana threw everything she had at the attackers. Her forces fought with desperate courage. But courage could not overcome the tactical and technological disadvantages they faced. The Terrans and their allies adapted constantly. Researcher Dongmin worked from a mobile command ship, breaking Dominion encryption in real time. Every enemy communication was intercepted and decoded. Every order General Hana gave was known to Kyungsoo before it was executed. The Dominion fleet fought blind while humanity saw everything. It was not a fair fight. It was not supposed to be. Humanity had not started this war. They were simply determined to finish it. On the 12th day, war leader Jae-sung's relief fleet finally arrived. 3,000 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel, ready to crush the attackers. Jae-sung expected to find the invaders retreating in the face of overwhelming numbers. Instead, he found his capital's defenses shattered and the enemy firmly entrenched. Kyungsoo had used the time well. His ships now controlled the orbital space around Valtrine Prime. The defense platforms that remained were under Allied control, captured rather than destroyed. His forces outnumbered the defenders and held superior positions. Jae-sung ordered an immediate assault anyway. He had 3,000 ships. Surely that was enough. His fleet charged forward with the desperation of men who knew they were fighting for their civilization's survival. The battle that followed was the largest in galactic history. 5,000 warships engaged in close quarters around Valtrine Prime. Space burned with weapons fire. Ships died by the dozen. But the Terrans held their ground. Admiral Kyungsoo coordinated the defense with cold efficiency. His ships formed a layered defense that forced Jae-sung's fleet to fight through multiple kill zones. The Nethik and Korthan vessels fought with savage joy, finally able to strike at their former masters directly. By the 15th day, Jae-sung had lost half his fleet. His ships were running out of ammunition and fuel. The infrastructure that normally supported the Dominion military was damaged or captured. He had no supplies, no reinforcements, no hope. On the 17th day, General Hana contacted Admiral Kyungsoo with an offer of surrender. She could not win. Further fighting would only waste lives. She asked for terms. Kyungsoo told her to contact her civilian government. Military surrender was not enough. The Dominion as an empire had to yield. War leader Jae-sung tried to refuse. His ships prepared for a final, desperate assault. Then High Chancellor Ji-won overrode him. She had watched her empire burn for months. She had seen rebellion spread across dozens of worlds. She had witnessed the destruction of the most powerful military in the galaxy. Enough. It was over. She broadcast her surrender on all frequencies. The Valtrine Dominion yielded to the Terran forces and their allies. All military action would cease immediately. The war was over. In the sudden silence that followed, Admiral Kyungsoo felt no joy, only exhaustion and sorrow for the lives lost. His crew cheered, but he remembered all the battles, all the sacrifice. Victory tasted bitter. War leader Jae-sung sat in his command chair and wept. His proud fleet, his invincible dominion, brought to its knees by species they had dismissed as primitive. The weight of failure crushed him. General Hana oversaw the stand-down of her forces. She had fought well with what she had, but skill and courage could not overcome arrogance and stupidity at the highest levels. The Dominion had underestimated humanity. Now they would pay the price. On Earth, Commander Yan-hee received word of the surrender. The war had lasted 8 months. In that time, humanity had gone from defending their homeworld to toppling the greatest empire in the galaxy. The cost had been terrible, but humans had survived. More than survived, they had won. The Valtrine High Council met in emergency session. The chamber was ancient, built from black stone that had witnessed 10,000 years of decisions. Today it witnessed something new: fear. High Chancellor Ji-won stood before the assembled leaders and military commanders. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. The defeat at Mars was unprecedented, unacceptable. The Dominion could not show weakness. Every subject species watched for signs of vulnerability. If humanity could resist successfully, others might try the same. War leader Jae Sung listened to the debates with growing impatience. The council members talked about diplomacy, about negotiation, about finding a peaceful solution. Fools. All of them. The time for talking had passed. Humanity had humiliated the Dominion. They needed to be crushed completely and publicly. He stood and spoke over the arguing voices. The Dominion would commit 5 additional fleets to the war. 2,000 warships. They would not make the mistake of underestimating the Terrans again. They would not stop until human worlds burned and their species learned the cost of defiance. Jiwon agreed reluctantly. She authorized the mobilization and placed Jae Sung in overall command. He left the council chamber already planning the campaign. This time there would be no mercy, no warnings, just overwhelming force applied until nothing remained. In Terran space, Captain Yan He had been promoted to commander and given authority over all military operations. She stood in a war room deep beneath Earth's surface and studied star maps with her senior officers. The Dominion would return. The only question was when and how. Commander Yan He knew humanity could not win a defensive war. The Dominion had too many ships, too many resources. If humans waited for the enemy to attack, they would eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Defense had given them the first victory. Offense would have to win them the war. She called for Commander Bora, humanity's leading expert on the alien technology salvaged from the derelict ship. Bora had spent 15 years studying the wreckage and had made multiple breakthroughs. Her latest discovery was the most important. Bora explained her findings with barely contained excitement. She had cracked the principles behind the alien ship's faster-than-light drive. It was different from Dominion technology. Better, more efficient. She could retrofit Terran ships with improved drives that would give them superior strategic mobility. Yan He understood immediately. If human ships could move faster than Dominion vessels, they could choose when and where to fight. They could strike deep into enemy territory and escape before reinforcements arrived. They could turn the Dominion's size against them. She authorized immediate implementation. Every available engineer worked around the clock installing the new drives. Within 2 months, the Terran fleet was faster than anything the Dominion could field. Meanwhile, Commander Sung Ho led the first offensive operations. His mission was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. Take a small task force deep into Dominion space and destroy supply depots, communication stations, and isolated outposts. Make the enemy worry about their rear areas. Force them to spread their forces. Sung Ho's ships struck like ghosts. They appeared without warning, destroyed their targets, and vanished before Dominion forces could respond. His crews became legends. The enemy called them demons and put enormous bounties on their capture. But Sung Ho was not alone. A dozen other task forces operated across Dominion space. They targeted infrastructure and logistics. War was not just about battles. It was about resources and supply lines. Humanity understood this. The Dominion apparently did not. War leader Jae Sung found himself fighting a war he did not understand. His massive fleets moved toward Terran space, but before they arrived, their supply bases were destroyed. Their communication networks went dark. Ships ran out of fuel and ammunition because the depots they expected to resupply from no longer existed. He tried to concentrate his forces, but the Terrans hit him from multiple directions simultaneously. His intelligence officers could not track the enemy movements. The humans appeared to move faster than possible. They struck planets the Dominion had held for centuries, systems that were supposed to be safe. On the Dominion colony world of Valkyra, diplomat Su Jin met secretly with representatives of the Nethic people. The Nethic had been conquered by the Dominion 200 years ago. They were skilled engineers who built ships and weapons for their masters. They were also deeply resentful of their servitude. Su Jin offered them hope. Humanity was fighting the Dominion and winning. The great empire was not invincible. If the Nethic helped humanity, if they rose up against their oppressors, the Terrans would support them. Together they could break the chains the Dominion had forged. The Nethic leaders were skeptical but desperate. They had attempted rebellion before and been crushed mercilessly, but they had never had outside support before. They had never seen the Dominion bloodied and uncertain. After 3 days of discussion, they agreed. The Nethic rebellion began with sabotage. Warships under construction suddenly developed critical flaws. Weapons malfunctioned during testing. Computer systems crashed for no apparent reason. The Dominion's military production slowed to a crawl. Then came the uprising. Nethic workers seized control of orbital shipyards. They broadcast messages calling for other subject species to join them. The Dominion tried to respond, but their forces were scattered across the galaxy chasing Terran raiders. Similar rebellions erupted on 6 other worlds. Species that had suffered under Dominion rule for generations saw opportunity and seized it. Some succeeded. Some were crushed. But all of them weakened the Empire. High Chancellor Ji-wan watched her empire fracture and felt centuries of certainty crumble. The Dominion's power had always rested on the belief that resistance was futile. That belief was dying. Subject species no longer feared Valtrine retribution. They saw weakness in exploitation. She demanded answers from her military commanders. How were the Terrans moving so fast? How were they coordinating with rebel groups? How had a single primitive species created such chaos? No one had answers. Only excuses. War leader Jae-sung made a desperate decision. He would ignore the rebellions and the raiders. He would take every available warship and attack Earth directly. If he destroyed the human homeworld, the war would end. The rebellions would collapse without Terran support. It was risky but necessary. He assembled the largest fleet in Dominion history. 3,000 warships gathered in deep space and prepared for the final assault on Terran space. Jae-sung stood on his flagship's bridge and felt confidence return. Humans were clever and resourceful, but they could not stand against this. In the Terran war room, Commander Yeon-hee received intelligence reports about the massive Dominion fleet. Her analysts predicted it would reach Earth within 3 weeks. She studied the numbers and felt her stomach tighten. 3,000 ships. Humanity had less than 500 combat-capable vessels, but she did not panic. She had planned for this scenario. The Dominion thought destroying Earth would win the war. They were wrong. Humanity had never put all their strength in one place. That was a mistake empires made. Humans were smarter. She gave orders to her task force commanders. Ignore the big fleet. Let it come to Earth. Meanwhile, strike at the Dominion homeworld. Attack Valtrine Prime itself. Show the Empire what it felt like to have war come home. Admiral Kyung-soo received his orders with grim satisfaction. He had the newest and fastest ships humanity could build. His mission was to take the war directly to the heart of the Dominion, while their forces were committed elsewhere. It was audacious. It was insane. It was perfectly human. His fleet departed immediately. Behind them, Earth prepared for siege. Ahead lay the Dominion capital, and the chance to strike a blow the Empire would never forget. War leader Jae-sung's massive fleet entered Terran space expecting resistance. Instead, they found it almost empty. A few defense platforms and patrol ships, nothing that could stop 3,000 warships. Jae-sung felt suspicion creep into his confidence. Where was the Terran fleet? Then the message reached him from home. A Terran fleet had attacked Valtrine Prime. The capital was under siege. The High Council demanded his immediate return. Jae-sung stared at the communication in disbelief. Impossible. The humans could not move that fast. They could not strike so deep into Dominion territory, but they had. While he had been gathering his fleet for a grand assault, the Terrans had gone after what really mattered. Not territory, not military forces, the enemy leadership, the heart of the Empire. Jae-sung gave the order to turn back. His fleet reversed course, but he knew he was already too late. The Terrans had outmaneuvered him completely. Admiral Daeho expected fear. He expected panic and desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, the Terran fleet moved into position with calm precision. 30 warships arranged themselves in a defensive formation around Mars and its orbital stations. Compared to his 200 vessels, it looked pathetic. From his flagship, Daeho watched the tactical display and shook his head. The humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, probably both. He decided to be generous. He would destroy only half their fleet before accepting their surrender. Let them keep something to remember their defeat. Fleet Admiral Hae-jin stood beside him, reviewing the data on human ships. They were smaller than Dominion vessels, but not as small as expected. Strange energy readings came from their hulls. Their engines produced output levels that seemed inconsistent with their apparent technology. She mentioned this to Daeho. He waved her concerns away. Sensor errors, probably. Human ships were jamming Dominion scanners with primitive electronic warfare. It would not matter once the shooting started. Numbers and firepower decided battles. The Dominion had both. On the Terran flagship near Mars, Captain Yan-He sat in her command chair and watched the enemy fleet with cold calculation. She had trained for this her entire career. Humanity had war-gamed first contact scenarios thousands of times. They had built weapons designed specifically to fight technologically superior opponents. Now it was time to see if their preparations were enough. Colonel Min Seo commanded the defense platforms orbiting Mars. 12 massive stations, each bristling with weapons humanity had developed in secret. She checked her systems one final time. Everything showed green. All weapons were ready. She opened a channel to Captain Yan-He and reported ready status. Yan-He acknowledged and gave the order to wait. Let the enemy come to them. Let Arrogance bring the Dominion fleet into range. Daeho ordered his ships forward. They moved in a standard attack formation, something the Dominion had used successfully for thousands of years. The formation maximized firepower while protecting the flagship. Against primitive opponents, it was more than sufficient. When the range closed to what Daeho considered optimal, he gave the order to fire. 200 warships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Energy beams and plasma bolts crossed the distance between fleets in seconds. It was a devastating barrage, enough to shatter any conventional defense. The Terran shields absorbed it. Every ship held position. Not a single vessel was destroyed. Daeho stared at his tactical display in confusion. Their shields should not be that strong. The energy readings did not match the observed defensive capability. Before he could process this, Colonel Min Seo gave her own order. The Mars defense platforms opened fire. What emerged from those stations was unlike anything the Dominion had encountered before. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to 20% the speed of light. Solid metal slugs weighing tons and moving fast enough to ignore conventional shielding. They punched through Dominion shields like they did not exist. 15 Dominion warships died in the first salvo. Simply ceased to exist as the relativistic projectiles tore through them. Explosions bloomed across the enemy formation. Daeho felt his ship shudder as nearby vessels were destroyed. Captain Sung-Ho commanded a squadron of Terran destroyers. He had studied Dominion tactics for years, knew their doctrine, understood their strengths and weaknesses. The Dominion fought like a hammer, using overwhelming force and rigid formations. Humanity would fight like water, flowing around strength and exploiting weakness. His ships broke formation and scattered. They moved independently, each captain making their own decisions based on real-time data. The Dominion fleet tried to track them but struggled. Their targeting systems were designed for conventional warfare against predictable opponents. Sung-Ho's destroyers struck from unexpected angles. They hit damaged Dominion ships, finishing what the defense platform started. They targeted weapons and engines, crippling rather than destroying. A crippled ship was a distraction. A destroyed ship was forgotten. Engineer Yu Jin worked deep in the Terran flagship's computer core. She monitored the distributed artificial intelligence systems humanity had developed for warfare. The AI did not make decisions. It processed data. Every sensor reading from every Terran ship fed into a central network. The AI analyzed everything in real time, finding patterns and predicting enemy actions. It told Captain Yan-He where the Dominion fleet would move before they moved. It identified weak points in their formation before they became obvious. It was not magic. It was information warfare at a level the Dominion had never imagined possible. Admiral Daeho tried to rally his fleet. He ordered his ships to reform, to concentrate their firepower. Some captains obeyed. Others panicked and broke formation entirely. The neat attack pattern dissolved into chaos. Fleet Admiral He Jin grabbed Daeho's arm. Their casualties were approaching 30%. They had destroyed exactly 0 enemy ships. This was not a battle. This was a massacre. They needed to retreat. Daeho could not accept it. Could not believe it. The Dominion did not lose to primitive species. It was impossible. He ordered all ships to focus fire on the nearest Terran vessel. Concentrate everything on a single target. 50 Dominion ships turned their weapons on one Terran destroyer. The combined firepower was enormous. For a moment it seemed to work. The Terran shields flickered and weakened. Then the other Terran ships moved to support their comrade. They positioned themselves to share the incoming fire, distributing damage across multiple vessels. Meanwhile, Colonel Min Seo's platforms kept firing. Every shot killed another Dominion warship. The enemy fleet was burning. Debris filled the space around Mars. Escape pods launched from dying ships, their crews abandoning vessels they had thought invincible. Captain Sung-Ho saw the Dominion flagship trying to withdraw. He took his squadron on an intercept course, not to destroy it, to hurt it, to make sure the survivors remembered this day. His ships raked the flagship's hull with weapons fire, tearing through its armor, destroying its weapon mounts. Admiral Daeho felt his ship dying around him. Fires burned on multiple decks. His crew was screaming. His proud flagship, which had led the conquest of 3 species, was crippled by primitives who should not have been able to fight back. Fleet Admiral Hai Jin took command and ordered a general retreat. Every surviving Dominion ship that could still move turned and fled. They used emergency faster-than-light jumps, something normally forbidden in combat because of the risk. Right now, risk did not matter. Survival did. The Terran fleet did not pursue. Captain Yan-He watched them go and felt no satisfaction. Only grim determination. This was just the beginning. The Dominion would be back with more ships, more weapons. They would not make the same mistakes twice, but humanity would be ready. They had won the first battle. They had proven they could fight. More importantly, they had shown the galaxy that the Dominion could bleed. Colonel Minseo tallied the damage to her platforms. Minimal. The Terrans had lost 3 destroyers, with 2 more heavily damaged. Against that, the Dominion had lost 140 ships. It was not just a victory. It was a statement. Admiral Daeho's flagship limped back toward Dominion space. His crew worked frantically to keep systems running. Daeho himself sat in his command chair staring at nothing. In 30 years of service, he had never lost a battle. Now he had lost catastrophically to an enemy he had dismissed as irrelevant. When his ship finally reached the Dominion capital, he would have to face High Chancellor Ji-Wan. He would have to explain how he lost 70% of his fleet. He would have to admit that humanity was not primitive, not weak, not easy prey. The Dominion's arrogance had cost them 140 warships. It had cost them the illusion of invincibility. Most importantly, it had cost them the initiative. Humanity had seized it and would not let go. On Earth, news of the victory spread quickly. People celebrated in the streets, but those who understood strategy knew the truth. The Dominion would return, next time with more ships and bitter determination. The Battle of Mars was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of a war that would reshape the galaxy. Captain Yan-He stood on the bridge of her ship and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was licking its wounds and planning revenge. Let them come. Humanity had spent 200 years preparing for the worst. The worst had arrived, and humans had met it with fire and steel. They would do so again. The stars looked the same as they always had, cold, distant, and uncaring. Commander Hyun-Woo stood on the bridge of his survey ship and watched the scanners display information about the 3rd planet from a yellow star. It was blue and green, covered in water and land. The scanners showed cities, satellites, and primitive spacecraft moving between the planet and its moon. Hyun-Woo belonged to the Valtrine Dominion, the greatest empire in the known galaxy. For 10,000 years, his people had ruled over 12,000 star systems. They had conquered hundreds of species and brought them under Dominion control. Some surrendered peacefully. Others fought and lost. The result was always the same. This new species called themselves humans. They lived on a planet called Earth. Hyun-Woo watched their ships move through space and felt something close to pity. Their vessels were slow and clumsy. Their weapons were basic projectile launchers and simple energy weapons. They had not even left their own star system yet. They knew nothing of the vast galaxy around them. He recorded everything and sent his report back to the Dominion capital. The message would take weeks to arrive, but Hyun-Woo already knew what the response would be. The Dominion never passed up a chance to expand its territory. These humans would be given a choice: surrender or be destroyed. On the Dominion capital world, High Chancellor Ji-Wan read the report with barely concealed amusement. Another primitive species discovered at the edge of known space, another world to add to the empire. She called her military advisors and told them to prepare an annexation fleet. This would be routine. Ambassador Taemin was assigned to make first contact. He was a career diplomat who had negotiated the surrender of 17 species during his lifetime. He took pride in his work. The Dominion believed in giving inferior species a chance to submit peacefully. It saved resources and prevented unnecessary destruction. Timon's ship entered the Terran system 3 months after Hyun-Woo's initial survey. The humans detected his approach immediately. They sent communication signals in dozens of languages, trying to establish contact. Timon smiled at their eagerness. They had no idea what was coming. The first meeting took place on a space station orbiting Earth. Timon met with a human delegation led by a woman named Captain Yeon-hee. She was younger than he expected, with dark eyes that watched him carefully. Around her stood military officers and government officials, all trying to hide their nervousness. Timon delivered his message through a translation device. The Valtrine Dominion had discovered humanity and welcomed them to the galactic community. However, there were rules. Humanity would accept protected status under Dominion authority. They would surrender control of their military, their resources, and their government. In return, the Dominion would allow them to continue existing. Captain Yeon-hee listened without interrupting. When Timon finished, she conferred quietly with her team. Then she looked directly at him and spoke clearly. Humanity appreciated the contact. They were interested in meeting other species and learning about the galaxy. However, they would not surrender their sovereignty. Humans governed themselves. They always had and always would. Timon felt his good mood evaporate. He tried again, speaking slowly as if to a child. Perhaps they did not understand. The Dominion was offering protection. Without it, humanity was vulnerable. Other species might not be as generous. This was the only reasonable choice. Captain Yeon-hee's expression never changed. She repeated her answer. Humanity would govern itself. They were willing to discuss trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual cooperation. But they would not submit to foreign rule. The meeting ended badly. Timon returned to his ship frustrated and angry. How could such a primitive species be so foolish? Did they not realize how outmatched they were? The Dominion fleet had weapons that could crack planets. They had conquered civilizations far more advanced than humanity. This refusal was not bravery. It was stupidity. His report reached the High Chancellor within hours. Ji-won read it twice, certain she had misunderstood. When she realized she had not, her amusement turned to cold anger. No species refused the Dominion. No one. She summoned Admiral Daeho and gave him simple orders. Take a battle fleet into Terran space. Destroy several of their orbital stations. Make it clear what defiance would cost them. When they saw Dominion power firsthand, they would reconsider their foolish pride. Admiral Daeho was a veteran of 30 campaigns. He had overseen the subjugation of 6 different species. This assignment seemed almost insulting in its simplicity, a show of force against primitives who barely understood space travel. He gathered 200 warships and set course for Earth. The Dominion fleet entered Terran space without asking permission. Why would they? Permission implied equality, and there was no equality here. Daeho positioned his ships in a formation designed to intimidate. His vessels were massive, bristling with weapons and powered by technology these humans could not begin to comprehend. He opened a communication channel and delivered his ultimatum. The Terrans had 1 week to surrender completely. If they refused, the Dominion would begin destroying their worlds one by one. Resistance was impossible. Their only choice was the speed of their submission. Captain Yeon-hee responded from the bridge of a Terran warship. She thanked Admiral Daeho for his message. Then she told him that he had violated Terran space without authorization. His fleet should leave immediately. If it did not, humanity would consider it an act of war. Daeho actually laughed. War? These primitives wanted war with the Dominion? He had fought species with technology centuries beyond humanity's current level. They had all lost. What could these humans possibly do against him? He gave the order to target Earth's largest space station. His weapons officers locked onto their target. The station held 10,000 people. Destroying it would teach humanity the price of defiance. Daeho felt no hesitation. The Dominion had destroyed far more in the name of expansion. What Admiral Daeho did not know, what the entire Dominion did not know, was that humanity had been preparing for this moment since they first reached space. Humans had always assumed they were not alone. They had always expected that first contact might be hostile. For 200 years, Earth's best scientists and engineers had worked in secret, developing weapons and defenses against threats they could only imagine. The Terrans had also found something in their asteroid belt decades ago. A derelict alien ship, ancient and damaged but full of technology. They had studied it, learned from it, and improved upon it. Humanity's technology was not as primitive as the Dominion believed. As Daeho's weapons powered up to fire, Captain Yan-He gave a single order to the Terran defense fleet. She had tried diplomacy. She had offered peace. The Dominion had chosen destruction. Now humanity would teach the Empire its first real lesson in 10,000 years. Arrogance had made the Valtrine blind. That blindness would cost them everything. The throne room of Valtrine Prime had witnessed 10,000 years of imperial glory. Today it witnessed humiliation. High Chancellor Ji-Wan stood before a long table where representatives from humanity and a dozen liberated species sat in judgment. She wore no official robes, no symbols of authority. Those had been stripped away. Terran Commandant Young-Su sat at the center of the table. He had been promoted from his position as a military strategist to lead the occupation authority. He was younger than Ji-Wan expected, with quiet eyes that missed nothing. Around him sat the leaders of species the Dominion had conquered and oppressed. Their presence was deliberate. The Valtrine needed to face what they had done. Young-Su read the terms of surrender without emotion. The Valtrine Dominion was dissolved effective immediately. All military forces would be demilitarized within 60 days. Warships would be turned over to the occupation authority or destroyed. Weapons manufacturing facilities would be dismantled. The Valtrine would be prohibited from maintaining armed forces beyond a small police contingent for internal security. Ji-Wan listened and felt her world ending. The Dominion had been eternal. It had spanned the galaxy and ruled with absolute power. Now it was being erased as if it had never existed. But the terms continued. War crimes tribunals would be established to investigate atrocities committed during Dominion rule. Those responsible for genocide, slavery, and systematic oppression would face justice. Ji-Wan felt her blood freeze. She had authorized actions during her time as High Chancellor that she knew would be examined. Others had done far worse. Young-Su paused and looked directly at her. This was not revenge, he said. This was accountability. The Dominion had caused suffering across the galaxy for millennia. That suffering could not be undone, but it could be acknowledged. The guilty would face consequences. The victims would have their day. The trials began 3 months later. They were public and broadcast across the galaxy. Former Dominion officials stood before judges from the species they had oppressed. Some showed remorse. Many did not. All faced the evidence of their crimes presented in meticulous detail. War leader Jae-Sung was among the first to be tried. The prosecution detailed his campaigns of conquest. The worlds burned, the populations enslaved or exterminated, the resources stripped away. He had followed orders, his defense argued. He had been a soldier serving his empire. The judges were not moved. Following orders did not excuse atrocities. Jae-Sung was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. He would spend his remaining years on a prison world, contemplating the cost of his ambitions. Others received similar sentences. Some faced execution for crimes too terrible to permit their continued existence. The galaxy watched and learned that power did not grant immunity from justice. Ambassador Yoon-ji arrived at Valtrine Prime 6 months after the surrender. Her mission was not military. It was diplomatic. The Dominion had fallen, but the galaxy needed something to replace it. A power vacuum would lead to chaos and conflict. She proposed a new galactic council. Every species would have equal representation regardless of their size or technological level. Decisions would be made through consensus rather than decree. No single species would hold veto power. It was radically different from anything the galaxy had known. The liberated species embraced the idea immediately. The Nethic, Korthan, and others who had suffered under Dominion rule wanted assurance that no new empire would arise. Equal representation was the best guarantee. The Valtrine were less enthusiastic. They had ruled for 10,000 years. The idea of being equal to species they had considered inferior was difficult to accept. But they had no choice. Their empire was gone. Their military was dismantled. They either joined the new order or faced isolation. Slowly, grudgingly, the Valtrine representatives agreed. High Chancellor Ji-Wan, stripped of her title and facing trial, advised her people to accept. Pride had cost them everything. Perhaps humility could save something. Captain Sang-Woo commanded the monitoring stations established throughout former Dominion space. These were early warning systems designed to detect any attempt to rebuild military power. His crews were multinational, combining humans with members of liberated species. They worked together to ensure peace was maintained. The work was tedious but necessary. Sangwoo knew that some Valtrine refused to accept their reduced status. There were rumors of hidden weapons caches, secret meetings of former military officers, plans for restoring the Empire. Most were harmless fantasies. Some required investigation. His teams dismantled 3 attempted rebel cells in the first year. The conspirators were arrested and tried. The message was clear. The old empire would not return. Any attempt to restore it would be crushed. On Valtrine Prime, life continued, but everything had changed. The grand capital that had once commanded 12,000 worlds was now just another planet. The orbital shipyards that had built conquest fleets were converted to produce civilian vessels. The military academies became universities teaching science and engineering. Historian Mi Young walked through the Imperial archives documenting the fall. She was Valtrine, born into a society that believed in its own superiority. She had watched that belief crumble. Now she worked to ensure future generations understood what happened and why. She interviewed survivors, collected documents, recorded testimonies. The story she assembled was one of hubris and willful blindness. The Dominion had become so powerful that it forgot power had limits. It had conquered so many species that it assumed all species could be conquered. Humanity proved that assumption fatally wrong. Mi Young's work was painful. She uncovered atrocities her own species had committed, documented cruelty that made her ashamed to be Valtrine. But she did not look away. The only path to redemption was through truth. Her volumes became required reading in the new educational system. Young Valtrine learned about the empire their ancestors built and the terrible price it extracted from others. They learned that strength without morality was tyranny, that conquest without consent was slavery, that arrogance without wisdom was catastrophe. Some rejected these lessons. They clung to the old beliefs, insisted the Dominion had been righteous. But they were fewer each year. The new generation grew up in a different galaxy. Admiral Kyung-soo, now retired from active service, visited Valtrine Prime 5 years after the war ended. He walked through the capital and saw the changes. The military monuments had been removed. In their place stood memorials to the victims of Dominion aggression. Parks replaced parade grounds. Schools stood where military barracks once loomed. He met with former General Hana, who now taught military history at a university. They discussed the war over tea, 2 old soldiers reflecting on what they had lived through. Hana admitted she had underestimated humanity. Kyung-soo admitted the war could have gone differently with a few changed decisions. They agreed that arrogance had been the Dominion's true enemy, not humanity. The Valtrine had believed themselves superior, and that belief blinded them. They saw what they expected rather than what existed. By the time they recognized their mistake, it was too late. Back on Earth, Fleet Admiral Yan He stood before a memorial to the fallen. 10,000 names were carved into black stone. Human soldiers and crew who died defending their world and liberating others. She came here every month to remember them and the cost of survival. Humanity had won the war, but winning had required sacrifice. Yan He had sent people to their deaths, made decisions that saved millions but cost thousands. She would carry those decisions for the rest of her life. A young officer approached and saluted. She had a question about Terran defense policy. The galaxy was peaceful now, but how long would that peace last? Should humanity maintain its military strength or reduce it? Yan He considered carefully before answering. Humanity would maintain sufficient strength to defend itself and others. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to ensure that no new empire ever again assumed it had the right to subjugate free beings. The galaxy had learned a lesson written in blood. Humanity would help ensure that lesson was not forgotten. Commandant Young-soo delivered his final report to the Terran government 7 years after the war. The occupation was ending. The monitoring systems were in place and functioning. The tribunals had completed their work. The new Galactic Council was operational. Former Dominion space was stable and peaceful. His recommendation was to withdraw most Terran forces and allow the liberated species to govern themselves. Humanity's role should be that of guardian, not ruler. They would protect the peace but not dictate it. The government accepted his recommendation. Terran forces withdrew gradually over the following year. They left behind embassies, trade agreements, and defense pacts. But not occupation. Humanity had fought for freedom. They would not deny it to others. On Valtrine Prime, the last Terran garrison departed amid mixed emotions. Some Valtrine were glad to see them go. Others worried about what would come next. But all recognized that humanity had been fair victors. They had punished the guilty but not the innocent. They had demanded justice but not revenge. High Chancellor G1, convicted of crimes against sentient beings, watched from her prison cell as the Terran ships departed.